Hi, I'm Camille, and this is Eamon, Cora, and Dulce. And today the question we are here to answer is, what is the effect of gender bias on the progression of women? So in order to answer this question, first I will define gender bias and prove its existence, and then Eamon, Cora, and Dulce will provide their research on the effect of gender bias on the progression of women in the fields of politics, film, and sports. So what is gender bias? Gender bias is defined as the unequal treatment in employment opportunity and expectations due to attitudes based on the sex of an employee or group of employees. This definition poses a problem because in order to identify gender bias, one has to measure unequal treatment. So how does one prove unequal treatment? Well, in a double-blind, randomized controlled study conducted at Yale, scientists were given two identical sets of applications for a lab manager position. One was labeled with a male gender name and the other was labeled with a female gender name. And results found that even if both applicants had the same level of experience, competence, ambitions, education, and references, females were rated significantly lower than males in hireability and competence solely due to their gender, which shows that gender is a major factor in the employment and therefore progression of women.
This brings us to the film industry, which over the past few months has been under fire for the multitude of sexual assault accusations, which brings to light other discrepancies in the film industry, such as the inclusion of women in film and their depiction. As concluded in a study by Dr. Smith with the University of Southern California, over the past 10 years, the prevalence of female speaking roles in the top 100 films in the past decade has gone up and down, reaching 31.4% of speaking roles being given to females in 2016. This number shows how many men are hired over women to have speaking roles in films. Furthermore, females are also subject to objectification and subject to traditional gender roles in films, which is shown when women are more likely to be depicted in sexy attire with some nudity and referenced as attractive in films. Additionally, women are also more likely to be shown as parents or caretakers in films, which cement traditional gender roles into the minds of the audience, which can have further implications. Women also have, in the directing part of the film industry, over the past 10 years, has gone up and down, reaching in 2017, 7.3% of the top 100 films were directed by women. This number shows not only how many men are hired more often than women, but also since out of these 7.3% of women, these women have never been one of the top directors in the past years. This number also shows how many men are asked to direct more than one movie, while women are more likely to only direct one, which shows the impact of gender bias in the film industry.
This brings us to our next topic, which is women in politics. So if you take a look at this pie chart shows the percentage of women in the world. Women actually make up a little more than a half, with 50.8%. Now this pie chart shows the percentage of women that currently hold an elected office. It's pretty blue in comparison, with only a quarter of women participating. So let's talk about why that is. Why are there so few women in politics then, given that they receive the same education? One of the dominant factors would be the expected gender roles. Traditionally, since women were seen as the sole domestic caretaker, there's a pressure to fill these roles. According to Lawless and Fox, two authors on notable books on the subject, although men and women work the same number of hours, time spent on household tasks are significantly different, with women losing up to 10 hours per week due to the unequal allocation of these household tasks. Another factor would be the lack of representation. According to Christina Ulbrich, a professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame, representation and participation are directly proportional. Therefore, representation, or lack of it, can negatively affect the number of women in the political industry. As seen by this graph, the underwhelming number of women in the political industry is less than adequate as a representation for younger women who might be looking to run. Ultimately, gender bias has had a negative effect on the progression of women in politics.
Sports. Now, this field contains multiple levels and divisions, but when it comes to federally funded or education institutions, there tends to be a lack of statistical data to prove the idea of gender bias. Now, this is due to implementation of the Title IX, which is a federal law that prohibits the discrimination against the basis of sex. Now, when we look at the effects, according to the National Federation of High School Associates, there has been a 3 million increase in the span of 39 years, whereas in college-level sports, there's only been a 200,000 increase, according to the National League of Athletic Associations. Now, but in professional level sports, one way to measure the gender inequality between genders is their average salary. Now, according to the Women's Foundation, there's still a huge gap between the male to female ratio of their average salary in major sports teams. Now, what are the gaps? One possible reason is the coverage in youth sports. Now, according to Michael A. Messenger from the University of Southern California and Cherry Cook from Purdue University, they analyzed 3 major televised sports news. Now, they are CBS, NBC, and ABC. Now, according to them, there's still an equal imbalance between the coverage time between men to female athletes, and even a drop in the women's sports promotion time to 1.6%. Now, these are actually some of the effects of gender bias in sports. They equal to unequal payment and unequal coverage time in sports news.
So, based on our research, we have developed 3 different solutions to counteract and prevent gender bias. First of all, in order to prevent gender bias in younger generations, we want to raise awareness of gender bias through the education of students and professors. However, with any solution, there are pros and cons. It would be difficult to measure the success of said program. Additionally, it would be hard to enforce and therefore not seen as mandatory to comply with. In order to counteract existing gender bias, we proposed the establishment of gender quotas. Gender quotas are often used to help catalyze the growth of women in their respective fields. Gender quotas have also been shown to work on different countries with similar Human Development Index rankings, such as Ireland. However, gender quotas are often seen as discriminative as they are based on biological sex and not due to personal merit.
Our third and final solution to combat gender bias in many different industries is to implement regular workplace assessments and development of workshops for women to assess whether the treatment of women in their respective careers. Though these workshops can be seen as highly expensive and also discriminatory for their concentration on only the advancement of women.
Alright, so all of the solutions we have presented have their pros and cons, but the one that we have selected to implement would be raise awareness about bias against women. Now, although the effects of this solution would be difficult to measure, it provides 2 functions. It is preventative against gender bias in younger generations as well as counteractive against gender bias in older generations. Also, in the other 2 solutions, they would provide an instant and obvious change in the employment and treatment of women, but we believe that this solution will provide more beneficial effects in the long term. So today we've presented to you many effects of gender bias on the progression of women, including objectification of women in film, pressure to fill pre-existing gender roles in politics, and lack of news coverage in sports. And we plan to counteract and prevent these effects through raising awareness of gender bias. Thank you.
All right. Let's start with you. Having the project finished, what, if anything, do you consider to be a gap in your team's research and would make you feel more confident about the conclusion?
Well, in general, there were gaps, such as Camille's. Actually, most of her STEM, woman in STEM wasn't actually part of the presentation, but we got the first point, which was the gender bias, which was actually the basis of our project, which I guess I could feel more confident if we actually implemented STEM in women's, because it actually has a lot of major gender gaps as well.
Okay. Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution.
So in my IRR, originally I thought the workplace assessments and workshops would be the most successful solution, but after seeing Cora's politics, I saw that quotas also seem to work, though upon discussion of all of these solutions, we decided that education would be the most effective, though quotas were also successful.
Okay. So reflecting on your team members' work, what was the IRR that had the greatest impact on your understanding?
On my personal understanding, I actually think it was Dulce's, because her research showed also, like, because gender gap, obviously there's the wage gap, but in her research it also included whether or not women got paid versus men. For like example, like female soccer players, if they win a game they get paid, if they don't win a game they don't get paid, versus men who get paid whether or not they win. So, yeah.
Okay. So what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to not include?
As said by Dulce, one of the basis of Camille's project was originally supposed to be STEM report. However, hers was hers had a different format than ours, so we decided not to include it. In that, hers kind of proved the existence of gender bias, while the rest of ours kind of focused more on the effects of gender bias. Thus, that's why we decided to kind of take out a lot of hers, but build on that central fact.
Okay. Thank you. All right.